Good morning, CET 116 students. I'm coming to you again today to finish up the slide presentation and the talking presentation on the subdivision regulations, Title 16 preliminary planning. Video 1 had got all the way through page 33 of the Title 16 regulations. Again, that can be found in your course documents, and you can look it up. It's Title 16 Pueblo County Subdivision Regulations. So let me start there. Let me share the screen with you here, and I'll bring up the regulations. As you can see here, this is the preliminary plan regulations, and I was on page 33. Actually, we had talked about some of these, and now again, remember what we're looking at here are the requirements for the submittal, plating, and drawing of the subdivision regulation of the subdivision that would be given to the municipal agency to allow this to happen. As I mentioned, the preliminary documents really are the engineering documents. These are all the documents that are required. What's sort of unique about these is these will go to the Planning Commission, any sort of engineering, whoever the leader is of the engineering department or designee of that, whether it's the city planner or whether it might be underneath the public works director, whatever that might be. And then the engineer would work under them, or the engineer may have their own office. But this is the only time that, or not the only time, but the main time when the engineer can discuss with the design engineer and the client and the developer what is expected for this subdivision. Now, this particular information is housed inside the engineering office and becomes public record, but it's public record in that area, not to the buyer. The conveyance information and everything will come in the next piece of information, which is what's called the final plat. But our last slide left off on item 3, which is the traverse map, and that should be familiar to many of you because we had a chance to do a map in compliance with Colorado Revised Statutes. The next thing I'm going to be talking about now is a little bit of the requirements for the map. So over here in item 4, it talks about lot and street layout, including all the dimensions to the nearest foot. Now I will hit on some of these, not all of them. But I wanted to show you kind of the importance of this now. So I guess the way I kind of look at the process as we're progressing through it, the first one, the sketch plan, was really kind of a general idea on how to do that. We really weren't concerned about the details of the numbers, but as you get the more and more refined in the submittals, now the details and the numbers become very specific. Here it talks about at this time we should have the lot and street layout, including the dimensions to the nearest foot. Now that's kind of a little strange to be to the nearest foot. Right now, most people are doing to the nearest hundredth of a foot, simply because the CAD systems are so capable of doing that right now. You don't want to just round them off. You'd rather have them as accurate as you possibly can. You have to have the lots and blocks numbered consecutively. You have to have the location identification of all existing and proposed public and private easements at this time. So here you're starting to have to show this information much more specifically. You have to have the sites reserved for dedicated for parks, playgrounds, and other public uses. Many of the subdivision regulations require now that the surveyor, engineer, the developer provide additional space, not just a space that's going to be sold off, but some additional spaces for the people within the area, like personal space, dedicated easements, playgrounds, parks, something of that nature. Any additional site information, like if there's going to be shopping centers, community facilities, industrial type operations, where they're going to be and how they're going to set in the property and how they set with the overall configuration of the property. Also have to develop uh, talk right now or in this particular submittal about what sort of use are you going to use. Is this going to be multifamily use, things like condominiums, hotels, or is it going to be something that could be one individual user? The reason for this is it helps to define the purpose and the use of the area and how much of a drain it's going to be on the infrastructure of the community. Things like obviously an apartment complex is going to use much more sewage and water because it's per the person, and there'll be much more people in that building than there would be in a single family development. So these are things you have to look at right now. Also looking at common space. They're also looking at the area now. Want to know how you're using all the total area and how it's being utilized, or how it's in how it's going to be utilized. Again, remember, this is all planning. You need to have any existing buildings within 200 feet of the subdivision coming up, and you have to show any sort of existing utilities or infrastructure that exists there. Again, there's probably going to be connections to those as they go along. Any kind of utility easements or anything like that must be researched and shown on this. It's very important that the municipal agency knows that there may be something that may be encumbering somewhere else. Item 5 is a map, and each of these talk about the map. So these can be individual maps, or these can be all pieces of information that's on the map. Remember, most of this information can either be put in text where it's answering some of the questions, or it can be done graphically where it's in some sort of a graphical image on the mapping. Any of those things can be done in the submittal, but they are required to at least be on there or addressed and be able to answer these questions for the Planning Commission and the Engineering Department. Also looking at any sort of soil types at this time. You have to consult the Soil Conservation Service. Any kind of vegetation. They want to know if you're in a forested area. Item 6 here talks about things on the map such as a lot, street layout, subdivision, but then they want to show how the existing contours will be affected by those lot and streets. So they're looking for 2-foot minimal intervals for your contours. You notice that in our subdivision we had 2-foot interval contours, so we can actually look and plan our properties. You also have to have a generalized grading plan. Areas, and like if there's going to be any cut and fill, and what the finished elevation is going to look like, or the finished contours. This must be done at this particular area. Also have to indicate any sort of the stormwater management. Have you investigated the potential 100-year storm situation? This is where your civil engineer would definitely come involved. They'd be looking at what is the 100-year flood criteria in there and what is look like, and have you investigated, and have you done a model and actually modeled for capacity in both in all those considerations. You want to look at any existing water courses. Are there any drainages, culverts, anything like that? How are they going to be? And you also have to specify now what in detail what each of those structures would look like. So if you had a bridge, a roadway, piping, crossing, and even things such as where are you going to install culverts, and how are they going to be, and what would they look like? All of this information would have to be submitted in this document. The Planning Commission can determine and review. They want to look at the soil and vegetation types of things, and if you're going to take off a whole bunch of soil or topsoil, is that going to impact the downstream people and considerations to be done there? So they want to look at all of those things and how you're handling it. 16-2803 here, it talks about drawing requirements, and here is where the municipal agency can get really picky on this and say that they want it to be done, it has to be done quality, and it has to be a professional document. And this is where they're regulating it. One may say, well, why do they have the so many rights in here when this really isn't even their properties? Well, remember, once this is dedicated and turned over to the city or county or whatever municipal agency, they become the owners of the roadways, they become the owners of all the additional lands. So they're going to make sure that they meet their minimum criterion so that they can maintain them and take care of them here. Plus, it's their duty to make sure to protect the citizen who will be using this area and actually be impacted by this area, either as an owner or next door to it. Here are some of the requirements. You'll notice that it has to be done by a professional surveyor. It needs to be licensed people doing the work. And so just the average developer who doesn't want to spend money on the engineering and professional costs cannot get away with that. They do need a professional to do this. Text, they need the identical number. So in text, there should be copies of however many copies is required for submittal, what the copy should look like. And then in that text, there should be the total acreage, the function of the ownership, any of your sewage disposal. Here you should have anything like your substance of all your covenants, grants, easements, restrictions, geological investigations, table or soils, any monuments, monument records. These all have to be done in compliance with Colorado Revised Statutes. Remember, we had an opportunity to look at Colorado Revised Statutes when we talked about 3851-103, where we actually did our platting of our land survey. That is item 3 of this up here. We would have to do a land survey on this particular one, also on the outer boundary on that. Total number of proposed dwelling units, total numbers of square footage, and how you're going to use floor space and how it would be impacted here. Parking, any parking that would be on here. And then there's they're asking for an estimated use of water in gallons per day. Now, one may say, how would you do this? Well, you'd have to predict based upon if your development was actually sold out in that capacity, what would for example, a single family use in an average day of water, and then you multiply that by the number of users, and you could get a fair estimate so that the city could know what sort of impact it's going to have on their system. We do the same thing for sewage. Now, in this particular situation, they're also looking at how would you do sewage? Is sewage going to be into a communal system, for example, a sewage treatment system where it's actually the infrastructure's there, we'll connect onto it and pipe it away? Or is it done in individual sewage disposal systems? Individual sewage disposal systems are going to require a certain minimum size of a lot. In our area, our 2-acre lots is plenty sufficient for that. As a matter of fact, that's the reason many developers will use larger lots, because they could get away with individual sewage disposal systems. County governments do look hard at that and decide whether or not they want them. Many county governors don't want that. There's things such as they have to have leach fields and tank systems on individual sewage systems. So that's a reason for the larger lots. Plus, the soil types have to be adequate to handle those sort of situations. So the city government would need to know that that's been investigated. They also would be looking at, let's say, any other water supply things like water rights, claims against the property, so things such as the ditches and irrigation practices. Our particular subdivision that we're working on has a little drainage ditch that runs across that property. If you notice, it starts at the beginning and ends as it passes through. So it's most likely an irrigation system that runs all the way through the property and is actually part of the property. So it does have to be maintained, and it probably does have some legal rights, and it would require some sort of easement to take care of it. Evidence of any potable water under that might be used, wells and things of that nature. And also any unusable water, if it is on the property, how's it handled, and is it taken into consideration? P would be any public and private sewage treatment facilities that are either on there or going to be on there. That it deals with the one earlier. And let's see. The last thing is that the commission sort of has the right to make a decision, regulate this, and actually go back and have them look at other information should they need it. They want to make sure that all of the legal boxes, shall we say, are checked. The commission really does have a lot of power in this process, so it is encouraged that you learn to work with them. That being said, we have just talked about the preliminary plan requirements. Like I said, this is one that's very important for the civil engineer. And later on, I will be sharing with you some examples of this. For now, we are going to finish up on this section of this. The last section we'll be talking about in our class, in the county subdivision regulations, would be the information about the final plat. And actually, we'll talk a little bit about the some of the detailed drawings that may be a part of the subdivision process. Professor Minzik coming to you from video feed here, and I hope that you all are having a great time and being safe out there and taking care of yourselves. That being said, I am going to stop this. I am going to stop the share here and get back into the video with you. I'm going to stop the recording and